Ah, there it is. We are. Well, you know who we are. Tim, Johnny, Jacob. Busted pencils, fully leaded. Education talk. Educated educators talking education. John and Gordy, that's for you guys out there. Educated educators talking education. If everybody doesn't get that, John and Gordy, the morning guys in Madison, sometimes they're always fumbling. What is it you guys say that education and educators doing something about teaching? Like, come on, educated educators talking education. How much easier of a tagline do you want than that? Oh,
There's
so much
barely more than one word in it.
Educated educators talking education. Okay, so it's 3 different endings to educate. I guess that's tricky, Jacob.
Tim, you give me one root word and I can do anything with it.
I just don't understand how they'll occasionally mix, what is it? Educators teaching teaching? What?
I don't even know what that means.
We don't do any
That's
teaching.
got a different root, Tim. I can't understand teaching, but you tell me educate.
Yeah, that's what we do. Jacob, it's producer's choice today, and I'm not nervous.
Tim, you've come such a long way on this show from back when we started. You were so scared and timid of my crazy out there questions. I think we're starting to build a real synergy here where we all trust each other. We can have these wonderful conversations, and we can all agree that Jacob has really good questions. And that's something we can all agree on.
Yes, we all can. And Johnny Lupinacci, I know he can't believe that I'm not anxious today.
No, it's like Jacob said, you've come a long way, Tim.
All right, well.
All right, good show, guys. Thanks for coming. That was a good one.
That was a good one. Woo!
Tim has shown growth. He is proficient.
Yeah, we accomplished
proficiency.
We accomplished proficiency.
I'm not at grade level. I'm at proficiency. Woo!
Yep.
Well,
and with that,
go, Jacob.
Now for your moment of the intro to the show.
For producer Jacob's choice, chairman of the board.
Ow! You now have 2 choices.
Chairman of the board, Jacob.
Ow!
Jacob, chairman of the board.
I bet the board is spelled B-O-R-E-D.
We choose to go to the moon.
Life's full of tough choices in
You chose poorly.
Guys, I've got something really special planned for this episode. I don't know. I don't know if you guys like this or not, but I do have a clip.
Ooh.
Oh, I love
Would that be okay if I played a clip?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's listen to this clip, which will introduce today's show.
When your vice president, Dick Cheney, when he shot that guy in the face, how did he tell you? Did he call you? Did he come in and close the door?
You know...
how did that go down?
Well, every time Cheney would come in, a lot of people would yell, duck.
Guys, that's what we're talking about today. I hope I'm not breaking this to anybody. So, if you're very emotionally attached to Dick Cheney, this might be hard to hear. But Dick Cheney, 46th Vice President of the United States, passed away this week at the ripe old age of 84 years old. Cheney's passing has led many to begin assessing his legacy as a politician and public figure. While Cheney was a lifelong Republican who served in the administrations of multiple Republican presidents, most notably as George W. Bush's scheming vizier, his vocal opposition towards Donald Trump late in life has made him all the more controversial. Whether you're liberal, conservative, wherever you are, wherever you came from, you probably hate Dick Cheney. So that's got me thinking, guys. How do we go about teaching our young people about controversial figures like Dick Cheney without devolving into just crapping all over him because he sucks? What do we do?
Ooh.
That's why today, dear listener, I've invited 2 highly controversial educators to join me to talk about just that. Dr. Tim Slecker, Dr. Johnny Lupinacci, thank you so much for joining me today.
Ooh, thanks for having us on today, Jacob. I really, really like it. Always look forward to the invite.
Much appreciated. So I'm going to start us off with just the general question here. In general, not talking about a specific figure, but how do you approach, Tim, talking about controversial figures with your students? I know that for me, when my little brothers will come to me and ask me, what is this person all about? Or what was this historical event about? The first thing I do is take a big sigh and go, am I going to say what I think about this? Or am I going to come up with some sort of fair-minded answer about this figure? And I think that's kind of part of the process. Tim, hit us with it.
Well, I mean, you're asking a good question. If I'm going to teach about it as opposed to have a conversation in a bar over a beer, right? Because that's a different setting, and so to ask about what we're teaching, there's a level of appropriateness that would be with anything, and if we're talking about human beings, um, controversy, or is it just the reality of the complicated nature of what it means to exist as a conscious member of the species? I've only met maybe two people who I would easily probably say, yeah, no dirt that I could ever think there would be on any of them, but everybody has something, and so I think, though, asking that question, Jacob, it depends on when you're asking it, because if you're asking it today in 2025, um, it's not the same answer I would have given in 2003 when Bush Cheney were fully in command and rocking Iraq.
Because at that time you were a big fan.
I was massive. Woo, I was like, yeah, I can't wait to get me a chainsaw and get me a beer with George W. No, and I say that because I probably presented a critical approach, but again, we're talking about teaching, particularly teaching social studies, and for me, it's the sense of always pointing out that if there's a critique that we want to put out there, what's the evidence behind the critique? And so, my own individual either liking or disliking someone was not really the point, because I was doing my best to say, if there is a criticism, let's lay it out there and let's put it out there. So at that time for Cheney, we looked very closely, my students and I, at his connection to Halliburton, and whether or not his, what it was, the CEO or whatever he was at the time, whether that had anything to do that might conjure up some senses of being like, well, should he be allowed to do that? Should Halliburton get all of the contracts to rebuild the mess they blew up? So I think on that sense, we present it now today. Wow. Man, I controversial figures. I mean, I think anytime you're going to teach controversy today, my advice still stands, which is as objective as you can with lots and lots of evidence to be a part of the discussion. But I guess I think I would find myself treading much more lightly. I don't know that I would say we're not going to talk about that, but because the time in which we do these things sadly influences the way we teach. I'm not advocating for that as being the way. I'm just kind of being more realistic now. 20 years later. So that's my answer.
Johnny, what do you think about Tim's answer, and what is your answer to that question?
Well, I think it's a tough one, man. I like Tim's and very similar approach in terms of, your question being, how do you teach about any controversial figure? I think you encourage students, especially if we're talking about right now, if we're teaching about, the life works of, former Vice President Dick Cheney, then we're looking at this idea that we're saying, hey, go out there and gather as much information as you can around the work and accomplishments and controversies that surround this person, and let's tease them out in class. Let's talk through it. Let's gather the information, get multiple perspectives, and see, what can we learn. I always like to avoid good or bad, right? But it's kind of like one of those dichotomies we find ourselves in. Like, the purpose of that exercise isn't to determine for us whether we think Dick Cheney is a good guy or a bad guy, right? Is he a hero or is he a villain? But to rather look at, the evidence and sort of see the muddiness of people's works. And one of the things I always like, when people ask about, what do you think about, especially when there was that massive turn, right? Because we can most think of, like, if we pick two big moments, we can think of like his, architecting in support of the Iraq War. That's one of the big ones. Aside from all the jokes, the man has a long reign of of SNL skits and jokes and all kinds of things that he was that his character or the role he was in, people liked to portray. But the big things being, in my mind and in my teaching career, his architecting and position on the Iraq War, and then second to that, then now like that massive turn, right? There's a story for you. One of the things I would situate it around, Jacob, is that there are political or there are key figures in a democracy or in learning history or in any part of the world or our lives, or whether we're looking at sports, right, or whether we're looking at the arts. There are artists who are complicated, and there are certainly complicated things about the former Vice President Dick Cheney. And part of that complication invites us to be learners, right? That's not like any teacher saying, well, let me tell you, he was a bad man, or here's why he was great. You're not teaching. You're just like sharing. And especially if any teacher say that's like, not only are you not teaching, but you're kind of full of something that comes out the back end, because everybody knows you can't be just good or bad unless you're, I guess, Mother Teresa or something else. And even still, we always learn that human beings, have, things that they contribute that we could chalk up as like a win. And maybe in retrospect, we could chalk up as a loss. But one thing I would frame it around is I would say, maybe in my book, one of the all-time best bad cops in a duo of presidencies, we all know about good cop, bad cop. Stone cold Vice President Dick Cheney, ultimate bad cop.
Yeah.
On things. We can also say, dedicated his life to service of his country. All right. So that's a big one there. 10 points in, but complicated, because we would often say during that presidential administration, is it in service of your country, or is it in service of a company that you have a big stake in, Halliburton? But lots of interesting things for students to, especially this generation of learners, to dive into and really learn the nuances of things. And a man of consistency, I'd say. And maybe some listeners might say, oh, come on, now that's not true. Because here 1 minute he's for the Republicans, and then the next he's speaking out against Trump. But, I think truly a man who stuck by what he believed was right with conviction, right? And so that's where, if you have your beliefs and your systems and you stand by them, I guess, in some contexts, I find that at least not only admirable, but of interest, of study, even when I disagree. But it also explains why maybe he would, not favor Donald Trump. I mean, he wasn't ever a vice president, or even his rise to that. He was never known as a figure who pandered much to the polls. Right? Remember getting really into the weeds. It's a little bit of an analytical memoriam here going on. But remember, Tim, there were a lot of, I think there were a lot of jokes that I would call homophobic jokes at the expense of the fact that his, daughter came out as lesbian, which was a big thing, and his support of his daughter, being confusing for the Siths out there, both on the, liberal side and on the Democrat side. That's a listener joke. If you listen long enough, I always say only Siths speak in absolutes, right? So, that's kind of the thing is like, people would say like, I don't get it. He's a Republican, but he's okay with this stuff. Like, these are realities, folks, about people, right? Their families and their positions, and they reflect on life and change. So even if he did change, as some may say, when he showed his unsupport of Donald Trump in this current administration, back in those election times. And, I think people do change, but I see him as a man of pretty consistent conviction. If he believes something is right or wrong, like he stands by his belief, and did his jobs. So interestingly enough, we would look at that like figures in history that are controversial, as you said, or that I would say invite us to do our work, invite us to consider the gray, to get into the nuances of the situations and to hold space for, could you disagree with one thing about this person, but then agree with something else about them? Wow, what a thing. Hey, on that note, Tim, we have a pretty, we're pretty big fans of, Diana Ravitch.
Right.
One of your all-time faves. But I remember, being skeptical too at one point. Hey, you were part of the federal administration that put us in the mess we're in. And now you're on our team. Like, what's going on? And I was quite young. So it's like, I think, Tim, as we age, we get better at holding space for multiple events in people's lives. But absolutely would kind of make that the core of my lesson. Like, how is this an invitation to learn about the work and the impact of someone's, service and work to their country?
Talking about the opportunity to go from just being up on the lectern, teaching down to the students about something controversial. I like what you're saying, Johnny, about taking it as an opportunity as an educator to also be educated yourself, being open to learning more information, being open to that process, and going from delivering information to having a process together with the class. We are going to learn about this figure. You're going to find information. I'm going to present you with information. And together, we're going to suss this out, see what do we think about this. I think that's an interesting way of going about things, and I think it can be helpful. Tim, how do you feel about that method of kind of saying, hey, this is a controversial subject. I'm sure we've all got some thoughts on this. Let's talk it out.
Yeah, no, I mean that's exactly again, that's good teaching right there. Is that, again, and it's not to advocate neutrality either by doing that. You're actually, it's you're advocating critical thinking, putting forward, weighing evidence, making decisions, holding to a position, and maybe even a position with convictions behind a certain realm of evidence. And again, all of this sounds really exciting, and just reminds me of good teaching. And I don't know, hopefully I'm not going to ruin one of your questions, but yes, I mean, where we're at today, though, too, is to recognize that there is no such thing as teaching critical thought and critical thinking about figures, because I don't know, but there's a current sense of the world right now that says there are a group of people that we will only talk incredibly positively about, or don't talk about them at all. And then there's also quite a substantial list of created new villains that if we do talk about them, we better be talking about them critically and critically only. And boy, what a sad thing, because think about our show right now. We end every show with a moment of Zyn, and that's not a pitch for Zyn nicotine pouches. That's Howard Zinn. Even though we know our Johnny Lupinacci is a fan of
Tim,
both.
we've given free advertisement out.
No, but looking at. But, Howard Zinn, I think he's another example. I know we're talking about Dick Cheney, controversial. Yes. But um, today, if you talked about him positively, and tried to teach any of the potential positive attributes of what it took to write an alternative history, you could be labeled now as promoting un-Americanism, because if you hear about the way Howard Zinn is framed specifically by President Trump, I mean, this is an anti-war radical Marxist terrorist who hates America. And what what does that do when we've kind of said, we know who the heroes are, we know who the villains are, and therefore now you have to teach. And when the reality of quote hero, quote villain, and again, Johnny points out, what about people who transition into a place of going from one thing to another? Well, that's a flip flopper. We're not teaching about them either.
Well,
Johnny.
I mean, Tim, and I just would urge this to keep saying it. You're never one or the other, any single one of us.
Right.
It's about your actions every day and what you do, and like the compilation of those. And whether putting someone on a pedestal as a hero, or putting someone on, off the pedestal or down on the floor as a villain, these kind of pigeonhole us into patterns of misleading stories and all kinds of stuff. So I mean, I urge us, gather information, gather multiple perspectives, and like you said, Tim, before, opportunity to think critically or practice our critical thinking. About time. And interestingly, too, enough side, I was remembering, because I'm trying to think, this was Jacob kind of caught us a little bit today. Now I'm the anxious guy. But I was thinking about this, because Dick Cheney did speak out against the Trump administration. He's not a big fan of the current presidential administration, especially in those, elections and stuff that were happening. But it's almost like, too, now I'm remembering, like, he's a big reason there's so much executive power in government.
Right.
Like, this is like, I mean, no, like, it's hard to avoid the jokes because I grew up, right, with every week there being a Dick Cheney joke on SNL. But it's, and this is maybe subconsciously related, but it's almost like when I eat too much for dinner, and then I complain about having a stomach ache, like, this stomach ache. And I say, this is bad food that I ate and whatever. I blame everything. So not, poking fun at somebody who's passed, and, never celebrating the loss of anyone who's put hard work into things. Right. And we can certainly acknowledge that. And I think done some pretty amazing things too, as well as some equally, maybe even, more tremendous harmful things. That's my thoughts and opinions over the years. But I like to think about there's plenty of both in all of us. So again, opportunity to invite students to think critically, and no matter, especially if it's outside of your comfort zone, like, maybe this is a hero or a villain in your household, right? Still gather information, process it, talk with others about it, study it. That word there, study it, not be told what to think about it, study it, right? And, come up with conclusions that may not be, fixed in forever. All of our conclusions that we come up with need to be dynamic. That might change as I experience more in my life or as I gather more information. So, more critical thinking.
There you go.
I think that perspective of trying to always be open to learning more about these figures and trying to have an open mind when approaching it is useful. I'm wondering, and this is for both of you, maybe we can have a nice open roundtable discussion. Can you recall a time where you were researching a figure you were going to teach and had your mind changed about that figure through learning about it in order to be a better teacher? Because, and also, I'm hoping... take your time. Nobody blurt out Pol Pot or something, okay? Because I don't want that. I mean, something okay, guys. All right, calm down.
Well, yeah.
If you changed your mind on George Washington Carver and realized he was pretty cool, that's okay. We can talk about that.
But I mean, this is common for every teacher listening. Probably just had about 10 people pop into their mind.
Yeah.
Especially social studies teachers and history teachers, because, you know, it's a pretty regular, like we learn more about, things in the past that are not acceptable today, and we're not condoning it. So when I teach about Jeffersonian democracy, you know, I have to also remind like my students, hey, let's hold space for a guy who had some really great ideas, but also had some pretty terrible, you know, beliefs and practices. And that this is not a free pass on like saying like, because he had some great ideas about democracy, you know, then, you know, let's just ignore the slavery stuff and all the, so anytime we're talking about, you know, historical figures, I think this comes up. And it most certainly, Jacob, through that kind of teaching is how I learned more about that with many more figures than I had imagined. To make it less, you know, political, you know, this was, you know, for the era I was both a student and then teaching. And I think it still is. I mean, Michael Jordan was iconic and was super important for a lot of, you know, young people, basketball player, all kinds of different things. And, you know, there would be lots of chosen biography reports on him. And I would learn a lot of stuff. Again, not saying like Michael Jordan's a bad guy or a good guy, but it's just, you know, you learn about the complicated ways that people's lives take them, or the ways that, you know, they make decisions in their life. And I think that's always a beautiful thing for students to learn about. And we get to co-learn with our students about that stuff, you know, like I think it's the way, you know, not to sound too much like a Sith myself, but like, you know, like maybe that's the Jedi way, right? Like to know the only Siths think in absolutes. So
I was going to say, I don't know that I've ever gone like, wow, they were so awesome until I found out, or wow, they were so horrible. And then I found out. It was more like Johnny would say, it was more of an additive to going, wow, how much more rich this life is. And that's what students should know. And I'll give a, you know, a really great, to me, example. There was a book came out in 1994. Loved it. Great book. Lies My Teacher Told Me.
oh yeah.
You know, great. And again, right now it's one of the books you're not allowed to teach anymore. But in it, he kind of points out the fact and calls it this idea of what we call heroification, which is to take, you know, a figure, kind of whitewash them out, turn them into like a pristine, you know, Greek statue, and therefore then never really seeing the humanity. And then these people are never able to even be looked at as something you could ever possibly be like them. And so it didn't work. So he goes on to to point out a more in-depth story. So Helen Keller, right? Helen Keller, always brought up, and boy, she was the deaf, dumb, and blind girl, didn't have pinball, but you
Not
know,
named Tommy.
not at that time, but and all of a sudden, her teacher helped her learn to communicate, and the end of the story, right? That's the Helen Keller story.
Yeah.
Except it's not. It like that story is almost, not that it's inconsequential because it's amazing, but it's then what she did with that ability to, once that connection of being able to communicate and put forward, a lifelong women's rights suffragist activist. None of that is taught to kids because we only teach this kind of very short, kind of like Helen Keller, the blind girl, the deaf girl, who all of a sudden overcame her, you know, limitations or disabilities, whatever you want, and go, that's actually not the cool part of the story.
It's the
cool
most
part,
sanitized version of the story.
Right,
It takes
right.
out the interesting, gritty parts of a person's life.
Right. And you know, and now because we add that depth to her, now all of a sudden you can start to have interesting questions. Why didn't you know this about her? Why didn't I know that about her
Yeah, yeah.
until 1994 when I finally read Lies My Teacher Told Me? And I was a social studies teacher going on for my PhD in teaching American history, and it was finding books. So, I mean, yeah, when we talk about teaching figures, so you come back to Dick Cheney, and again, what is a totality of life? Yeah, Johnny points out, the expansion of the executive powers. Holy crap! Did he know that they would be excessively even stretched more so than he ever imagined? Or should you be able to look back and go, he should have known? He should have known he was setting this up. Or do you go, no, at the time he thought that the kind of polite Washington kind of institutional boundaries, or were just things that were going to be respected, and he had no sense of an outward disrespect for democracy, diplomacy, for even just culture. And so, yeah, I mean, interesting person, very resolute. And here's the one thing though: loved fly fishing for trout. You got to give him a props on that.
Yeah, generally Dick Cheney, super awesome guy. We're all agreed. But even he was wrong sometimes, and that's the lesson. Even people that we like can be wrong on things. And I have one last real question of the night for you two fine fellas here with me. Last question. Young people oftentimes are given to thinking things are awesome or terrible. And when you teach things, you can teach them like, hey, it turns out SpongeBob was also an alcoholic. Now they hate SpongeBob instead of thinking he was awesome. So here's what I want to ask you. How do you teach that nuance and have students come away not changing their mind? Oh, okay, this figure was actually terrible. How do you get them to understand that nuanced aspect of life?
Oh, I think on that one is actually now too is to kind of come in front loading that nuance is what we're actually kind of teaching here, because I'll say from experience that assuming potentially teaching something powerful or teaching something controversial might add depth, it can turn into a pretty strong judgmental after effect by students. And I saw that 100% when I used Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States, where students really became, and it wasn't that they were like anti-American, but it just turned them into cynics.
Mm-hmm.
And that was never the goal when you're thinking about critical thinking and trying to give, alternative points of view. And so I would have front loaded this by saying, we're going to read and look at something that might challenge what you assumed you already knew. And when we find that challenge, let's deal with how we're going to make sense of it.
I love that, Tim. Start off with, tell them the mission statement. Don't surprise them with the nuance. Say, hey, we're going to talk about some figures. We're going to talk about some history. And yeah, some of it's going to be this, some of it's going to be that. We're going to come together and we're going to learn it. I like that. Johnny, what do you think? How are you feeling about that? Because I know you want to get that message across. You don't want to be misunderstood. How do you make sure you are understood?
I'm still stuck on SpongeBob being an alcoholic.
I knew he was going to say that.
That my brain went to mush when you said. I don't even remember the question. I'm still like I'm thinking, and I'm like, wait, is he?
If anybody was, it was Mr. Krabby.
I don't want to besmirch any of these people. Okay, Mr. Krabs, SpongeBob. I don't know any inside information on these. Mr. Krabs, he's a pillar of the community, a great businessman. I've got no accusations.
The Krabby Patties. Oh man, no, I think it's great. I do honestly, wholeheartedly forget the question.
I can repeat the question. I'm the host.
Okay.
You need.
Please repeat the question for me, and let's remove the SpongeBob stuff.
Yes, I'm
all
sorry.
I can think about right now. It's okay.
I shouldn't have used metaphors or sarcasm. I know that's a big stumbling block. I hope you can forgive me.
Forgiven.
Young people, they hear things. They think it's either awesome or it's terrible.
Oh, that's right.
How do you make sure that when you're teaching a nuanced subject that the people listening to you aren't just going to take it as hearing the nuance and saying, oh, okay, he's bad?
Yeah, I think, man, that's a tough one because I think, well, I guess this generation is going to get really good at this, Jacob, because we're coming out. I don't know if we're coming out of it. It's just things are more nuanced for young people because they have to be, because cancel culture on all sides of things is so prevalent and familiar in their lives. And also, I think a big contributor to the increase of anxiety and like the different kinds of statistics we read about, students being less likely to share openly in class and different things is, when I ask students why or what their thoughts are about stuff and why they have apprehension to sharing or sitting in the mess of complications sometimes, they talk about the social cost of it. And that's very real. I know a lot of us will say, well, you have to mature and grow out of that. And I kind of hope more of our peers do, but it doesn't appear to be that way with social media these days. Like what people think of us matters to us. And that's by and large always been the case and will always be the case. And I don't think is a signifier of immaturity unless it takes over, right? And like it becomes the only thing you think about. It can be a problem. But a lot of young, like there's a high social cost. It's a big risk, to think differently or to be even worse, as my students will tell me all the time, undecided, like kind of like truly like I see both sides because now you have nobody, right? And when this is the kind of danger of a highly polarized two-party or what we've referred to on this show, I don't know if any other places in media are calling it this, but a culture war, so hey guys, did you see me use the sarcasm?
Right, I
there?
saw
Yeah,
it. I was like,
did
woo!
it. Yeah, no,
That was impressive.
But the polarization of things, it has its impact. So, Jacob, I think young people are getting better at this because they're experiencing that. Wait a minute, the gray areas where everything is. It sucks that it's coming to head in such like intense ways. Where like I disagree with a ton of the work and the decisions that former Vice President Dick Cheney made. But I'm equally appalled by people who are just like dragging him unnecessarily. Like we have the critique, we know the critique, it's not hidden. You can tastefully remember the bad with the good, or even if you feel like there's no good, there's no need to like dance on the losses of others. I mean, that's just to me bad character. And so we're in these times where I hope young people, or I guess you don't have to be any age, but certainly young people get to kind of have these experience and say, I don't like the way that tastes, right? I don't like the way that plays out. Let's hold space for being, in the middle, not politically in the middle, but like undecided. I like certain things about this and I hate certain things about this other part of it. And so that's my answer, Jacob, is I think you remind students it's okay to be in that space. We all really are, but groupthink kind of pulls us. What do you really think? Let's make sure our classroom is a space where we can agree, disagree, and not even that phrase, agree to disagree, just flat out. It's okay for us to disagree. That's not necessarily an agreement. That's just a sign that we're thinking critically about stuff. Right. So what do we then propose? How are we generative? Because Tim talked about that cynicism, right? I always say to negate, you got to create. To oppose, you better propose. Right. And I say it with that enthusiasm in the classroom. Right. So my students are probably shaking their heads because they listen, and I'm always say extra credit if you listen to Busted Pencils, you forced pencil busters. No. But I say, like, if you're going to negate, you better create, right? If you're going to oppose, you best propose. So that keeps that generative responsibility as part of, I don't like this, but what I think we're getting at here, always get to that point where together we make something of it. And Jacob, that's where I'm at. And I'd be lying if I was saying I'm not going to immediately after the show Google about SpongeBob, because I tried to and a quick one during the show and didn't get any hits. So I'm guilty of that. I'm gonna solve this one because I only held space for SpongeBob to be awesome, and now I find out that Jacob tells me he's maybe not a bad guy, because I mean lots of people struggle with alcoholism, but certainly it's a different character than I had ever imagined. And now I'm sad for SpongeBob. So I got to figure this out, because I mean, does he have good community? He does. All right. This is not an episode.
Move on.
Analyzing SpongeBob. Let's get back to this. Jacob, how come you haven't asked us if you've ever been shot on a hunting trip or not? Or our favorite story of being shot by one of our friends, out in the woods.
That's next week's show, guys. Come on, let's not get ahead of things. But Dr. Johnny Lupinacci, Dr. Tim Slucker, you guys have been fantastic. The best guests who have ever been on their own show. I have to say it. I mean, you guys have been fantastic and super controversial on today's episode of the Producer's Choice Show. Final question from me is, did you see the movie Vice about Dick Cheney?
Loved it.
How about you, Johnny?
It. You know what? I don't
Christian
think I have.
Bale.
Is that the who?
Christian Bale.
Oh, yeah, I did see that years and years ago. Oh, we might have to rewatch that.
I saw it on Christmas Day when it came out. And really, what better way to spend Christmas than watching a movie about Dick Cheney? Nothing says holidays like Dick Cheney. Yep. And so tune in next week for our retrospective on the movie Vice and what we learned from that movie. And
I'm excited. I'm going to rewatch and we're going to come back.
You guys see me doing? You see me doing on Dick Cheney? See that?
Yeah,
See?
that's pretty good.
That's how he talked right there.
Yeah. And
right,
now this is the thing we do.
Let's go.
Final thing. What's Tim, Dr. Tim Slucker, what's your favorite movie about a controversial historical figure? Because I brought up one and now it's your turn.
My favorite movie about a controversial historical figure. I
guess you could really pick any historical figure, right? They're all controversial.
Yeah, I think so. You know what? I saw one of these. It was either on Netflix or Prime, but it was there was a series of biographies, and it was a dramatization on the life of Einstein.
Huh.
And it really captured the complexity of his humanness and some of his frailties and misgivings and things that maybe, and yet you still kind of came out of the show without a going, I hate that guy now. It was like, wow, he wasn't just brilliant.
But the part at the end where you find out he was learning all this because he wanted to blow up the earth, that really disappointed me. I think Einstein shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, oh, geez. Now, Johnny's not going to get that, Jacob.
I'm sorry, Johnny, that was a joke. You don't have to look that up. I was just kidding. Einstein is still pretty cool. What's your favorite movie about a controversial historical figure?
Well, I have two. One just found out it's controversial. It's called The Search for the SquarePants. So SpongeBob movie, Search for the SquarePants. That's probably it. No, really, it's a recency bias because I like what Jacob said, especially in the theme of this show. Like any historical figure could be considered controversial depending on who you are. And certainly probably some of my most favorite biopics. I mean, I love a good biopic. Some of my most favorite biopics. Other folks might consider controversial, and I consider them like, hero stories. So I'll save all of those for another time. But Oppenheimer, recency bias for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But Oppenheimer, what a film, man. And what a interesting character. Oppenheimer. So if you haven't seen that one, it's recency bias in my head is like, we all know famous for, the atomic bomb stuff, which is pretty much, if there's such thing as hero or villain and you got to pick, architect and main man on the A-bomb, Oppenheimer. So you get so Oppenheimer, that film, wow, what a film about a controversial figure. Didn't really change much, but certainly showed like nuancy and depth. And a great one. So that
Tim,
one in Search for the Square Pants.
Tim, can you get your cat to purr into the mic? I see you're holding a cat now. Johnny, purr.
Did you get that? Or she was, well, hey, Jacob.
Oh, thank you, Tim. That was sick.
You got it.
And in case any of the listeners had any doubts, Tim and Johnny want you to know they're very smart and they watch movies that have Einstein in them. So there you go. That's the show.
True. Yeah, that's the theme. That's the takeaway.
That's the takeaway. And now, for a man with a cat,
it's time for your moment of zen. In war, good guys always become bad guys.
Hey, thanks for listening to this episode of Producer's Choice. And remember, you can grab great podcasts filled with more Busted Pencils content on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or, of course, on the Civic Media website or at bustedpencils.com. So don't you dare even think about being late for homeroom on Monday. And be sure to grab next week's class in session on Wednesday. And you know you're going to see us back on the downloads for Friday's Producer's Choice. But if you want to, and I know you want to, listen to Busted Pencils broadcast at 3 p.m. Central Time every Saturday across all the Civic Media Network stations for 1 hour of your favorite blue-collar scholars, Tim and Johnny. And keep busting pencils.